In this video, we're going to talk about everything related to the Notice and Eligibility record. So we'll talk about submitting and creating a Notice and Eligibility record, the linked CTA that's created when you submit a notice, the review process, all the associated to-dos, and how they're created and how they're completed, and then a couple of notice rules and the Notice and Eligibility report. So got a lot to get through. So first I'm just going to give a little quick overview of how this process will work. So the Notice and Eligibility is a child record of the NIFTY record. It's this first node here, but the only way that record is created is by answering a set of questions that helps identify if the participant is eligible or not, and those are all located within the CTA. So a transition navigator will go in and answer all those questions and then click the Submit Notice button, and then at that point a record will be created that will show up underneath the Notice and Eligibility node, and then that record will just create state review field, or not create, will contain state review fields. So in order for the state to see and be able to review what you've submitted, they will run a Notice and Eligibility report, and in that there'll be all those required fields that you had to answer to submit a notice. And so that's how they'll see what you've submitted without having to pick through all of the CTA. And then they'll use the state review fields that make up the Notice and Eligibility record to either deny or approve your notice. And from there, you can kind of continue with the transition process. So to know what is required to submit a notice, let's just start with that. You use the missing tool. So to see everything that's required, you would want to be located on the living CTA node and then click missing. And then that's going to show you all of the different fields that you need to fill in to submit a notice. So you can literally answer them by, clicking through this review missing tool and do that, and that's going to be, the quickest way to find them all. Or you can go through each node and kind of see what you want to answer within it, and then check that you've answered everything by using the missing button in the node. But I will note that you can see now it's only 4 total. That's because there's only 4 things that are missing from this node. So depending on where you bring up the missing tool, it's going to only show you what it can. So if you're within a node, it's only going to show you the missing things within that node, versus if you're on the top level, the living CTA level, it's going to show you everything that's missing within all the nodes underneath. If the missing button is grayed out, that just means that you have answered all the questions and there are no more missing questions. I will mention, though, that there are a couple fields that aren't included in the missing tool. Those are the nursing facility name and address questions. Oops, thought I clicked on that. So these guys, just because this lookup tool is a little bit different, and that's gone over in the CTA video if you have any questions. Just because that's a little different, it doesn't work in review missing. So if you haven't filled this out, when you try to submit the notice, the system will still direct you to complete this, and it'll actually take you to this node and say, hey, this is missing, you need to fill this out. And there are also a couple fields in the participant record that it'll do that with too. I think if I actually click it now, since I haven't filled anything out, it'll take me there. Yep, so it's letting me know the area code must be entered because I need to enter a phone number for the person in order to submit a notice, and then it took me to the place that I need to do that. So the process of finding the required fields is really simple. The system kind of walks you through it, so that shouldn't be too hard. And you can use the missing tool to be your kind of crutch in that process, or you can just go through and answer everything that you would want to already in the CTA and kind of hit the fields that way. Just a reminder though, the entire CTA does not need to be filled out to submit the notice, nor does the transition plan questions. These are not at all required as a part of this process. It's just an optional thing that if that's your process, if that's what your agency wants to do, that's totally a possibility and you can do it, but it's not a limitation. So something else I wanted to mention that you would want to do before you would actually submit a notice is check out these HCBS eligibility outcomes. We have these system-generated calculations for each of the criteria and sub-criteria. It's kind of nice that you can get a good look and see where your participant is kind of measuring up in some of these criteria. If you already have a feeling that it's someone that might not be eligible based on the outcomes and you think they are, then it's a really good idea to look at these and give yourself a chance to defend why they are eligible. So if this overall HCBS eligibility ends up as not met once you enter everything, then you can describe in here why you think they really should be eligible, and then the state will see that and they can kind of make a judgment call from there. But if you don't do this before you submit it, then they're not going to be able to see that. And it's same with the notice and eligibility comments. You're going to want to do that prior to submitting the notice so that the state actually sees what you submitted. Another reason to check these out is you could have accidentally clicked the wrong radio button, which caused a person to not be eligible for a certain sub-criteria. And if you see that, oh, they're not met and I thought they should be met, then you can revisit in the CTA and make sure you've answered all the questions in the appropriate way. So that is something to check out before you go to submit a notice. And then something else to keep in mind is this submit notice button is controlled by the send to state /save CTA /submit notice permission. So if you can't access this submit notice button and you need to, just request that from whoever manages the user accounts at your agency and let them know that you need the ability to submit notices. Okay, so now instead of filling this all out in front of you guys and taking that time, I'm going to go to someone that I already filled all the required fields out. So Severus Snape. All right, so I'm going to open up this transition record and click on my Living CTA. If you click anywhere within the Living CTA, the Submit Notice button should be available. And now I'm going to submit it so that you guys can see what happens next. So I've successfully submitted it, so it's giving me that confirmation message so that I know that I've created a notice and eligibility, and now I can see a notice and eligibility record underneath that node. And you can also see a saved CTA was created with that exact same date and time. Can you see the timestamp is the exact same? We'll talk about that in a minute. Let's first talk about this newly created notice and eligibility. So if I slide over, you can see that the node label is quite long. It's because we do the full date and time, just because you could technically need to resubmit another one in the same day. And so we wanted to include time. And then at the end here, we have included a status. This can be either submitted, complete, or denied. And that just summarizes it so you don't actually have to click into the node and scroll down and see what the state reviewed it as. So those are that's the node label. Now for the record, we've got the submitted date and who submitted it by at the top. And then this is the linked CTA date. So it's not the date that you see right here, because this is the date and time that the saved CTA was actually created. Same with the notice. It's when I submitted the notice. But this date is the date that you would find in the general node of the Living CTA. So it is the date of the in-person meeting at the time that you submitted it. So that's important, just because sometimes the day the actual in-person meeting happened isn't always the date that you get around to entering all your information in and submitting it. So we want to highlight that here, and that's why we put that here in the record. And then the rest of the record is the state review section. And this is all read-only for agent users because it's specifically reserved for state users to review the notice and eligibility and then basically fill this out as needed. And something else to keep in mind is the lock icon. These lock icons are shown anytime there's a record that you cannot edit. So for the notice and eligibility and saved CTAs, which is whenever you create a copy of a CTA, they'll keep lining up down here. Whenever you have those guys, they're always going to be locked because saved CTA are supposed to be, a copy of this stamped like record at this date and time, and they should not be edited because it's preserving whatever data you had there at that point in time. So those will always be locked for you guys. And the notice and eligibility will also always be locked because it only has state review fields, and there's nothing for you guys to do in here. So it's not something that is passed back and forth like the old notice. What else? So you'll also see that these guys are paired based on their timestamp. That's one way to know that they're linked. But another thing to know is, so since we create this copy of the CTA whenever you submit a notice, just so that we do have whatever data you've entered in the living CTA at that point in time preserved, since down the line you'll go and update things. If you're working with the participant for a while, things might change and you might need to update the living CTA. Well, we want to make sure we preserve whatever the data was at the time you submitted the notice so that it's not confusing down the line. So that's why we always create a copy of the CTA when a notice and eligibility is submitted. And another way you can know that they're linked is if I try to delete this, which I can't, but a state user could. They're the only ones that can delete save CTA. It will give them an error and let them know, oh, you cannot delete this. It's linked to a notice and eligibility record, so you can't do that. So if you really needed to delete something and the agents were actually requesting the state to delete it, they would need to delete the notice and eligibility first and then the save CTA. So there is a firm, link behind the scenes that you guys can't see, but don't worry, you can't kind of have one without the other. Okay, so the next thing to talk about, I guess, is the review notice to do. So now that I've submitted this notice and eligibility, the submit notice to do will have been completed and deleted. So I can't see that anymore. But and that was created when the NIFTY record was added. Now there is a review notice to do. So you'll see also that this is read-only. You can only view the to-do item. You can't actually edit it. And the complete button is grayed out. That's because it's a state completable to-do, not an agent completable to-do. So the to-do date or the due date is always just defaults to today's date at 5 p.m. and the reminder date goes to today's date at 8 a.m. And this is just so that as soon as you guys have submitted it, it's kind of the system's way of notifying the state that they have something to do. So when a state user logs in and they're looking at their dashboard to-do list or, the monitors or all these different things that there are separate videos for training if you have questions on, they'll get to see this review notice pop up and say, oh, I need to review Severus Snape's notice. And it shows up on this list where you guys can see it because the case file to-do list shows all to-dos for the participant. The dashboard and calendar do not. Those just show the to-dos that you need to do as a user. So since I'm logged in as Mary Demo, if I went to my dashboard, I would not see this review notice to do in my to-do list because it's not something that I have to do. It's something that the state has to do. So I've actually logged in into another browser as a state user just to show you guys what this means. And so I'm going to refresh this so it gets all the new data that I just submitted. And if I look at this, I can see this review notice to do, and it's a pencil instead of a magnifying glass, showing that I can edit it. And the way that it's completed is I go to the Notice and Eligibility record, and I actually complete or deny it. So I'm going to just, pretend that I've confirmed the HCBS eligibility and this is complete. And now that I've done that, you'll see that the review notice to do has been completed and removed, and now there is an acknowledged notice complete to do. So this is an agent to do, so you can see the state can't edit it, they can only look at it. But it's in this to-do list because this to-do list shows all to-dos versus the to-dos only you specifically need to do. A lot of to-dos. So if I go back to my other tab where I'm logged in as an agent user and refresh, I shall see that. Yep, so here's my acknowledged notice to do. And the way that this one is completed is actually manually. You'll see the complete checkbox is no longer grayed out. It's actually editable and able to be completed. As soon as I have reviewed whatever they have put in the state review section, then I would acknowledge that and check that off as done. So the acknowledged to-dos really exist to alert the agent that, oh, hey, just the state has reviewed your notice, you're good to go with the next stage, or you're denied, and you should read the denied reasons and kind of check that out. So if the state would have clicked denied, this would say acknowledged notice denied. So that's the difference. Again, the due date and reminder date automatically are set to today's date. And so I'm going to complete this just so that you guys can see what that looks like. And so now that I've completed it and the notice was marked as complete, the to-do is removed and then a new to-do is created called the reevaluation to-do. So after the acknowledged notice complete is completed, this is the reevaluation due to-do is created because eligibility expires after 365 days. So if you end up working with the participant for a long time, maybe they need services for a while after transition, or maybe it just takes a super long time to transition them. After 365 days, you're going to need to reassess them. So that's what this to-do is based on. So it's using that CTA date that was in the completed notice and then bumping it out a year. And so that is what the reevaluation due to do is. Something else to know about if the notice is marked denied. If it's denied and there's no other notices that exist that were complete like prior, then nothing will exist. Like the to-dos will be completely gone because at that point you do not need to reevaluate and you'll just need to close. And so at that point it'll wait to show another to-do until you've added a close notice. So that, another way to get rid of the reevaluation due to do besides actually reevaluating, which means like submitting another notice, would be to close the participant. So, if they're done receiving transition services or whatever reason, you've successfully transitioned them and you're done working with them, if you add a closed notice and submit that, then the reevaluation due to do will go away because obviously you don't need to reevaluate them if they're going to be closed. So those are the notice related to-dos. Something else to note is that since you have to be reevaluated down the line if maybe major health changes occur or if it's coming up on a year. So the way you do that is you would go into the CTA and then basically update anything that has changed. Go through and do the assessment like normal with the participant, only you'll just be updating what's already in here. And so if many things haven't changed, it shouldn't be too hard to actually do that. So that's a kind of nice thing about the living CTA. But an important part of it is updating the date. So, if it's next year in July or August and you're like, shoot, I'm going to need to reevaluate my participant, you need to update that to be whatever that date is and then submit the notice. If you actually try to submit the notice before you do that, it'll give you an error saying, hey, a complete notice already exists with that same date. You need to update that date. So that's also another rule to keep in mind. And something else is, if this notice that was submitted ends up being denied, and it's only denied for a silly reason, like they wanted to see some more information in a certain area of the CTA, and then you go and change it, and they'd write that in these comments. That's why it's important to always go check out the state review section after they're done reviewing it. But if you make that change and then you want to resubmit again with the same date, because it really is the same date and you're just fixing something, then the system will allow that because it's denied. The only time it doesn't allow you to resubmit with the same date is when another one exists that's complete. So hopefully that makes sense. Last thing I want to go over is the Notice and Eligibility Report. So the way that the state makes these decisions is they'll run this Notice and Eligibility Report versus having to, comb through the CTA and be like, oh, here's a question here, and oh, here's a question in this section, and trying to find all the ones that you've actually answered. Instead of doing that, they could if they wanted, but most likely they'll be using the Notice and Eligibility Report. So to see that, you want to highlight and click the Notice and Eligibility record, and then go on Reports, and then click this Notice and Eligibility Report. So by doing that, it'll generate the Notice and Eligibility Report, which includes just a couple of basics about the participant. Sorry, this null right here is just because we have a demo agent set up and they don't work quite the right way as regular agencies do, and that's just for the purposes of this video, so ignore that. But so you have these what do you call it? Sorry, I just froze up. This basic participant information, and then you've got the date of the linked CTA, the HCBS eligibility determinations summarized right at the top so you can see that easy, and then any comments if there are any, and then the transition navigator information, and then it goes into actually all the different questions that you've answered, and they're categorized in the criteria, like in the same way that the criteria is categorized. So whatever goes into criteria door B, then those questions are listed. Whatever goes into determining door C, then those questions are listed, and so on. So that's how the report is set up. I just also want to note that there's a few fields that are included that aren't required to submit a notice. These are just a few fields that the state had denoted as things that add extra context and explanation, and so if you end up filling those out when you're doing the CTA, then they'll be included here as well. For example, like the do you curse or threaten others question, if you answered yes to that, and then there's a question that follows it that says, if yes, please explain. If you answer that, then the explanation's included on this report because, sorry, I wasn't in the right area, because that's just helpful information and really nice context. So that is how this report works. And what else is there to say? I think that is it. Oh, and then there is one more thing. Lastly, if you need the Notice and Eligibility record to be deleted because you accidentally submitted and did not mean to, that's perfectly fine and probably something that's going to happen. You won't be able to, but you can request that the state deletes it. So they'll have the power with this new release to be able to delete those kinds of records. And so you'll just have to ask them to do that. And then once they do that, any associated to-dos that are created because of a notice record will also be deleted. So that is the Notice and Eligibility.